National insurance, up. Capital gains tax, up. Inheritance tax, up. Energy taxes, up. Business rates, up. First-time buyer stamp duty, up. Pensions tax, up. They have fiddled the figures.
What happens when Rishi Sunak walks into the House of Commons armed to the teeth, ready to tear apart Keir Starmer and his government? Let's just say it's like watching a lion zeroing in on a clueless gazelle. Sunak doesn't just expose a plethora of broken promises, he shreds their claims bit by bit, calling out every twist and turn of the numbers. The new budget is nothing short of a tragedy, and we will have to suffer the consequences. But, more importantly, what made Rishi Sunak so angry that he blasted Starmer and Rachel Reeves throughout his last speech? Was it the dishonest fiddling with the figures, or was it something even worse?
Deputy Speaker, on the day that he took office, the Prime Minister said that he wanted to restore trust to British politics with action, not words. Well, today, his actions speak for themselves, with a budget that contains broken promise after broken promise. And reveals the simple truth that the Prime Minister and the Chancellor have not been straight with the British people.
Starmer talks a big game about being a man of action, but his budget is telling a very different story, one of broken promises and some serious fudging of the facts. The numbers don't lie, and they're showing that instead of transparency, we're getting twisted figures presented to fit a convenient political tale. From claims of non-existent budget black holes to constant denials about tax increases, it's a bit of a smoke and mirrors show. As time goes on, these half-truths are starting to catch up, and Rishi Sunak is more than happy to expose them.
Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Chancellor and Prime Minister have tried to say that they had no choice. But be in no doubt, their misleading claims about the state of the economy are nothing but a cynical political device.
Starmer and his team just can't stop telling the same old story, painting themselves as victims inheriting a mess from the previous government. But as the dust settles, it's becoming clear that they've been bending the truth to fit their narrative. They've turned the economy's fragile state into a way to win sympathy from voters. Poor Sir Keir and Labour, right? Because of course nothing is ever their fault.
I understand the Chancellor's shameless political motivations, why it suits her to cook up a false justification for her agenda. But today the OBR has in fact declined to back up her claims of a fictional £22 billion black hole. It actually appears nowhere in their report, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Rishi Sunak decided it was time to stop holding back, maybe because it was his last PMQs. He called things out boldly for the shamelessness it is. And no wonder can anyone actually deny that Labour has been spinning these poor inheritance tales to cover for their own agenda. There was no £22 billion black hole. The Office for Budget Responsibility itself disproved that claim. And the irony? Starmer and Rachel Reeves were using the very same Office for Budget Responsibility to push this narrative.
But because of those decisions that we made, the Chancellor inherited lower borrowing than France, America, Italy and Japan, and the second lowest debt in the entire G7. So any which way you look at it, Labour's claims about their inheritance are purely ludicrous. These are her choices, so stop blaming everyone else and take responsibility for them.
Rishi drove home his final point, dismantling Labour's entire budget. Yes, the economy was fragile, but much of that was due to global issues. The Ukraine crisis, the pandemic's fallout, every nation was hit. Despite it all, the UK was still doing better than most of Europe, ranking as the second fastest growing economy. Isn't it about time Starmer and his team took responsibility for their own decisions, which keep hurting the average Brit?
A few weeks ago, the Prime Minister said the budget would balance the books. But this budget does no such thing and reveals that they haven't been straight with the British people, because today the Chancellor has launched an enormous borrowing spree, saddling our children and grandchildren with billions upon billions pounds more debt, pushing up interest rates, leaving our economy more exposed to future shocks, and leading the OBR today to now forecast higher inflation in every year of the forecast.
What's another broken promise to Sakir? He's collecting them like infinity stones. This budget isn't balancing the books, it's breaking our backs. The data speaks for itself. More inflation, higher taxes, and rising debt. Future generations are already being saddled with it. As if that wasn't enough humiliation, Rishi has a bigger point here, one about moral responsibility.
Above all, that the Labour Party did not tell the truth. They said they wouldn't fiddle the figures. They have. They said they wouldn't increase borrowing. They have. They said they wouldn't raise taxes on working people. They have. Broken promise after broken promise, and it is the working people of this country that will pay the price.
It was quite the sight to see the House of Commons cheering along as Rishi brutally dismantled Labour's plans. Every false promise is exposed, and it's the British public who will pay the price. In his final speech, Rishi held nothing back. But while he delivered a demolition, the reality remains that this budget will land on our shoulders, and the consequences, well, they're not looking too promising. People are already making predictions based on analysis, and it is grim. Take a look for yourself.
Rachel Reeves described employers' national insurance as a tax on jobs, as a tax on employment. That's pretty much what it is. If all of a sudden you're going to be, well, this person cost me £30,000 a year to employ, now I'm going to have to give X amount more to the government as a result of having them, you're going to have to think twice about how many staff you can take on, and that's going to have a huge pressure on small businesses, surely.
Well, congrats. If you're a business owner, Labour's plan rewards you with extra taxes just for hiring people. It's a lose-lose all around. Businesses will be discouraged from hiring.
Will the Prime Minister show that he and his
on staff than pay these extra taxes? Who wouldn't reduce headcount if it means avoiding new penalties?
Some real shocks there that businesses are going to have to try and contend with. It's certainly going to act as a disincentive for any business looking to employ more people, and particularly those hard to reach, that the government is looking for small businesses in particular to try and get off benefits and into employment. So I'm slightly concerned at this, that it's going to have the opposite effect.
Small businesses, brace yourselves. This policy lands hardest on you. These businesses rely on their teams but might now struggle to afford the extra tax burden, effectively crushing any ambition to expand. Fewer jobs, stalled growth. It's almost like Labour skipped Economics 101. But then again, should we be surprised? And it's not just job seekers who are in for a rough ride. The ripple effects go much deeper.
Help things. But is it also going to potentially put a squeeze on real-time wage increases to keep up with inflation? We keep hearing about this. People's salaries haven't gone up, where the cost of living has gone up. A lot of these policies people are suggesting could be inflationary if the production lines, if, for example, the stream of products coming down, you suddenly find, because employment's more expensive or energy's more expensive, that things go up in general. Is that going to exacerbate a cost of living crisis? Are businesses going to have to say, well, look, we can't give staff increases in their salaries to keep up with the cost of living. We can't afford it.
As Rishi Sunak pointed out, inflation is going up, taxes are going up, and ultimately the cost of living is going up. Connect the dots, and what happens? Wages drop as businesses lose capital. This anti-business budget punishes entrepreneurs and risks mass layoffs. Labour sure knows how to outdo everyone when it comes to inflicting misery, and this time is no different. Aside from this tax, there is another problematic one, the rising inheritance tax. Here are the consequences that will bring, and none of them are pretty.
Something that is really going to hammer businesses, and that is the inheritance tax that is now going to be levied on residual pensions. So how is that going to work out in practice, particularly for family businesses or for family farms in wanting to pass their business on to the next generation? And that was totally unexpected, as was the freezing of the inheritance tax relief for another 2 years till 2030 at $325,000.
Do you think many businesses right now are thinking, do you know what, it might be more viable if we just shut up shop rather than wait for doomsday?
This came out of nowhere. Starmer led us to believe there'd be no new taxes, and then, surprise, he drops this bomb. Well, guess we know now that Sakir has a thing for lying. Family farms and small businesses now face steep taxes just to pass on their work to the next generation. If that wasn't tough enough, Labour has also ramped up worker rights laws that some might use to game the system. It sounds nice in theory, but reality, it's looking a bit grim.
You know, I do think it does seem very nice, very left-wing, very Labour, very kumbaya, let's all hug each other and support people to have all these wonderful sounding workers' rights. But we know we've got a problem with chronic absenteeism, especially actually, and people don't talk about this enough, the demographic that is absent from work the most are 18 to 25-year-olds. People would think, oh, it's going to be the older generation, it's going to be, you know, boomers with backache.
Productivity is slipping down the drain with chronic absenteeism on the rise. And now, it's practically encouraged. People have been given more excuses on a silver platter to continue their irresponsible behaviour. The issue here isn't support for legitimate absences, it's the alarming rate of absence, especially among young adults. With such high absenteeism, it's like handing out golden tickets for people to stay home.
Labour built their manifesto on 2.5% growth as a minimum. The OBR came back having looked at what Rachel Reeves has put in, not just in her budget, but with all the other employment legislation, and have downgraded the growth to less than 2% for at least the next 10 years.
Labour promised us 2.5% growth, yet here we are, not even close. Starmer's U-turns and broken promises are now all too familiar. The budget Rachel Reeves just handed down is, quite frankly, a train wreck. So here's to another decade of stagnation. Looks like that's what's really in store for us. The driving force behind this misery train is their ideology, one of socialism. And to our dismay, they value their ideas over our well-being by quite a lot. The whole debacle has earned Rachel Reeves quite a nickname now.
Yesterday's budget by Robert Reeves, £40 billion budget tax grab. The Office of Budget Responsibility, formerly beloved of the Labour Party, estimates that Reeves' left-wing attack on the people will leave every one of us 300 quid a year worse off. Millions will suffer because of this, and many businesses will go bust.
It seems Rachel Reeves has earned herself a new nickname, Robber Reeves, and honestly, it's quite fitting given what her budget is cooking up. Even the Office for Budget Responsibility, once Labour's go-to buddy, has called it out as a disaster that won't lead to growth. So what's the real agenda here? It's almost as if they're less interested in helping the economy and more in keeping certain political narratives alive.
It will ruin business, it will leave people with no money in their pockets. And why is she doing this? So she can chuck billions and billions and billions of pounds at the NHS and billions and billions and billions of pounds at her beloved public sector workers.
This budget, it's a total chokehold. Small businesses are about to face a serious uphill battle. Money is slipping straight out of people's pockets, and for what? So Reeves can funnel more funds to union works while the rest of us just sit back and watch our wallets shrink? Talk about a skewed priority list.
This time, Starmer and the gang were terrified of a repeat of that, so they deliberately lied to us and said they wouldn't put taxes up, they wouldn't put national insurance up. And guess what? When after the election, suddenly they found a £22 billion black hole in the finances, which changed everything and justified the fact
Labour knew what they were doing with all those election promises. They sold voters a dream while keeping the truth buried, knowing full well that if people had seen the real plan, no one would have signed up for this economic nightmare. Now, we're seeing the cracks, rising taxes, unchecked inflation, and to top it off, a phantom black hole in the budget they keep using as their all-purpose excuse. Economic experts are finally pitching in, calling out the budget for what it is, a facade that's starting to crumble.
Many very, very respected experts, economists, city types have today spelled out that essentially this just dooms the UK into flatlining at best for another decade.
This spells doom for the UK, plain and simple. With growth projections practically crawling, we're looking at another decade of economic stagnation. If it's misery for us common Brits, who will benefit from this wreckage? Only the chosen few, Labour's favourite crowd, those who seem to get by just fine without lifting a finger. It's everyone else who will be feeling the pinch.
I'll tell you who benefits from this budget, the people who do the least. So basically benefits claimants, because what this budget should have done is incorporated a massive campaign to reduce the welfare bill. I mean, the welfare bill is out of all control. It is ludicrous how many young people are supposedly too sick to work and being supported by the state.
Lazy policies made for lazy people. Now don't get it wrong, having a welfare system in place is good, but only when it's actually helping those in genuine need. Labour's vision? It's bloated, with a welfare net so wide it's catching people who could easily stand on their own. And while we're on the topic, Labour's obsession with worker rights sounds noble on paper, but in reality, it's just another loophole that gets exploited. All of this serves in the name of Labour's hidden socialist agenda, and frankly, it is getting a bit ridiculous.
Well, to borrow from Joe Biden, the word of the week, this budget is garbage. It's left-wing garbage. And these people, Starmer and the gang, they're just extreme socialists. Socialists are such idiots. Socialism has failed and failed and failed and failed. Everywhere people try socialism as a way of running the country, it ends in catastrophe.
Labour's socialist agenda under Starmer is steering the country into choppy waters. Time and again, this approach has flopped, and this budget only proves that the pattern isn't changing anytime soon. The new workers' rights and union privileges are a recipe for economic shutdown, creating incentives to work less and demand more. But wait, it's not just taxes for benefits, they're using your hard-earned money to cover the cost of illegal immigration too now, an issue that Starmer has fumbled repeatedly. If you find that hard to believe, take a closer look at the £75 million of taxpayer money slipping away with nothing to show for it.
Yvette Cooper announcing today this £75 million to add to the already announced £75 million for this pointless border command nonsense. That isn't convincing anybody, is it? And nor are the other things that have been announced today, of course, in some pathetic and empty attempt really to convince the public that they are on this problem.
Labour has already dedicated £75 million to tackle illegal immigration with drones patrolling the English Channel. Yet there's no clear follow-up plan on what happens after spotting people with drones, and the approach is painfully ineffective so far. The root issue is that Starmer's strategy seems to rely on an overly polite approach, aiming to appeal to migrants rather than taking decisive action. It's like trying to solve a national crisis with a pretty please.
Calling it bed, bread and soap. That's exactly what it's called. Bed, bread and soap. That's what you get.
And that's a great policy. Well, part of this new initiative by Starmer in the fine print involves sending our agencies to Iraq and to countries like Syria and so on, and trying to tell would-be illegal migrants and people smugglers that actually it's not so nice in the United Kingdom, that life isn't so good, you should stay in Iraq.
Believe it or not, Starmer's plan involves sending people to these countries and politely asking potential migrants to stay put. Does he really think this approach is going to work? Meanwhile, there's a more straightforward solution right at hand. Just return illegal immigrants to their countries of origin. Other nations, like Germany, have seen great success by cutting down on benefits for immigrants and ramping up border security. Starmer could take a page from their book, but instead, he's offering benefits, practically rolling out a red carpet. Oh, and you'll be paying for the red carpet and their living expenses.
I would just advance that I agree with you. Just by putting naval naval speedboats in the channel and just deterring those migrants for a few days, like they did in Australia, which absolutely solved the migrant problem. Why don't we just take this web page down, which would take about 30 seconds by my reckoning, and just stop providing the incentive to these people that are here with their hand out?
If you check the official government site, it's almost as if it's advertising incentives for illegal immigrants. Why not deploy the Navy to deter crossings? Nations like Australia have used their naval forces to secure borders effectively. The UK could be proactive rather than reactive, but it appears Labour's ideology stands in the way of implementing these common sense solutions.
We'll see more of this in Europe. As I say, we see Germany now enforcing its borders, which has got the Netherlands and other countries up in arms because they see that more illegal migrants are going to head towards them. So hopefully they in turn will enforce their borders. And once you get the notion running, a quaint old notion that our political leaders have forgotten, that borders are there to protect those within the borders, if they can reacquaint themselves with that very old lesson, we might see the end of this crisis. We didn't have.
Countries across Europe are taking strong measures for border security, and it's paying off. Starmer should consider following their lead before the UK's immigration crisis spirals further out of control. Unfortunately, Labour's ideological stance seems to prevent them from adopting these effective solutions, leaving the issue to fester instead.
Talk about the 55% of asylum applications we grant, the other 45% where we decline to grant asylum, the people still stay here. We don't really ever get rid of anyone.
And then this government's talking about granting those 90,000, by the way, amnesty.
Exactly. And so what signal does that send? You come here, you'll get asylum. Even if you don't get asylum, you'll get amnesty. We'll let you in. Just make that dangerous journey across the channel. We'll put you in clover. We'll give you rights to stay. Come to the United Kingdom. It's the land of milk and honey.
For perspective, France's acceptance rate for asylum seekers is only 5%, while in the UK, it's a staggering 55%. And those who are denied asylum often remain anyway, supported by taxpayer money while their claims are processed. Labour's stance seems to favour immigrants over its own citizens, giving the impression that they're more concerned with appeasing this demographic than addressing the needs of the public. Now you might ask, why would Starmer do that? The answer is simpler than you'd expect, but just as disappointing.
Goes with that in terms of economic cost, social cost, criminal cost, and we'll come back to that in a second. Why do we think, honestly, that, let's say, take Keir Starmer as an example, why does he continue with the rhetoric when he knows, he must know surely, that his approach is not going to work? Does he really think that he can...
So, what's in it for Labour? It boils down to votes. Starmer's popularity in the polls has been slipping, and Labour appears to be counting on a new voting demographic by catering to immigrants. They're hoping that by offering a warm welcome and generous benefits, they'll secure long-term support, even if it means taking a toll on the economy and leaving current citizens feeling sidelined. It's up to us to educate ourselves on all this nonsense, so just like Rishi Sunak, we can dismantle their narratives. That's something you can help with by liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It helps spread the truth and make more people aware of the dire situation Britain is.